You're live on the newsfeed late night. Uganda's Yoweri Museveni has been sworn in for his 6th term as president. The 76-year-old won re-election in January despite widespread reports of irregularities. His new 5-year term will see him leading Uganda for 40 years, making him one of Africa's longest-serving leaders. To talk more about this, I'm joined now by public affairs commentator Kwesi Tabaru, who is live for us in Uganda. Talk to us, Kwesi, about what the mood was in the country. Was it a jubilant celebration? This was, of course, televised nationwide, was it not?
Yes, it was. Good evening, everyone. Kampala today was calm, although business was a bit slow. The day was declared a national holiday, so most shops and businesses did not open. It was a jubilant mood at the Kololo ceremonial grounds, where 11 African heads of state were in attendance, and there were tens of other delegates from across the African continent. And maybe before I go, deeper into what transpired on the day, the clarification I'd like to give for our viewers is that, yes, this is President Yoweri Museveni's 6th elected term, but it's actually his 8th term in office. For 10 years, from 1986 to 1996, he was unelected, although he was president of Uganda. So the 6 terms, we are looking at them starting from the year 1996, when Uganda had elections.
Yeah. This victory, of course, is overshadowed by what others are saying is the bloodiest pre-election crackdown in years, where opposition candidates were forcibly prevented from campaigning and dozens of protesters were killed. I mean, others are still said to be somewhere in detention.
Yes, that's true. I think this was by far one of the most violent elections we've seen in the country, and that was always going to dominate the headlines, and that partially informed the deployment of security around the homes of 2 leading opposition figures, Robert Chagulanyi, or more popularly known as Bobi Wine, who came second in the election. His home in Magere, in the northern outskirts of Kampala, was surrounded by security forces, and so was the home of Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye. Before Bobi Wine, he was one of the leading contenders against President Yoweri Museveni. However, this security deployment has a lot to do with the history of the swearing-in ceremonies over the last 2 terms. So if I remember correctly, in 2011, when President Yoweri Museveni was sworn in for his 4th term, there was an incident on the way to the swearing-in ceremony where supporters of then leading opposition candidate Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye stoned the motorcade of the then Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan, and in the fracas that ensued, tens of people were shot at and killed. In 2016, we had a parallel swearing-in ceremony where the then leading opposition figure, who had come second, Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye, organized the parallel swearing-in ceremony days before the official swearing-in ceremony for President Museveni, and that in itself also led to chaos. There were hundreds of people arrested. So that partly informed the massive security deployment we saw in Kampala today. However, the swearing-in ceremony went quite uneventfully. There wasn't much in terms of arrests. We haven't had reports of any incidents or violence, at least in the central part of Uganda today.
Yeah. There are reports of some alternative swearing-in event that was being cooked by the opposition leader. And just talk to us about that. Is there any truth to those allegations?
That's what we are hearing from the security forces and government spokespeople. However, I can't independently verify that. But like I mentioned earlier, going by past precedents, I wouldn't put it past the opposition candidates to hold an alternative swearing-in ceremony. And the opposition candidate we're talking about here, Bobi Wine, or officially known as Robert Chagulanyi, has not officially allowed the results of this past election. He still thinks that he won the election against President Yoweri Museveni, and the results were rigged in his opponent's favor. So I can't put it past him that he would attempt parallel swearing-in ceremony.
Yeah. Now, logically, one would say to declare a win in elections, you need to be looking at a comprehensive balancing, I suppose, of things. Everyone allowed to campaign as they should. It's a fair process, and there's a clear win that everybody believes is a win. Was it a case in this particular election?
Well, in such matters, we can't go with opinions. There was a court case in the Supreme Court challenging the election, and the case was withdrawn by candidate Bobi Wine or Robert Chagulanyi. So we can only rely on the claims on either side, but the Independent Electoral Commission declared President Yoweri Museveni the winner with 58% of the vote, which is consistent with one of the last polls we had just a few weeks to the election, which had pointed at the incumbent winning by about 57%. And going by the kind of support that the incumbent still enjoys in most parts of rural Uganda, it's plausible that he exceeded the 50% margin.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're saying at this point in time, Bobi Wine couldn't prove any malpractice in the voting process?
At least in the courts of law, he couldn't prove that. And in one of his last statements, he said he was taking his case to the people of Uganda to make a decision. And the interpretation of that is that he's taking it to the streets. So maybe we expected to see his supporters coming out in their thousands on the streets to defend their victory. However, we haven't seen that today.
What is the impact then of this move, the swearing in of the president for the opposition, and what is Bobi Wine saying? Where is the next move for him?
Well, I think for the opposition, it's back to the drawing board. Bobi Wine's party, the National Unity Platform, which is a new party, has only been in existence for the last 2 years, is now the second biggest party in the parliament of Uganda. It's the biggest opposition party by a stretch, with about 60 MPs in a house of about 500 MPs. So they have quite a lot to do. In Uganda's parliament, they will decide who becomes the leader of opposition. They will constitute majority of the posts in the shadow opposition cabinet. They will also constitute most of the accountability committees in parliament. So there's a lot of work cut out for them in this Museveni administration. However, like I mentioned, that candidate Robert Chagulanyi has put his case before the people of Uganda. So we don't know if he will continue with this campaign of justifying his assumed victory against the incumbent, and that will be on the streets. So it's also one of the options he could pursue. But going by previous examples, it's very likely that he will focus on building his party and trying to rally support for the next election, which is in 5 years.
Are there confirmed reports of other African leaders who attended the swearing-in as a sign of their support?
Yes, the government had announced at the beginning of the week that they had sent out invitations to about 42 heads of state from across the continent and beyond. By the time we had the ceremonies today, physically in attendance, we had 11 African heads of state from across the region here in East Africa, the presidents of Kenya, the new president from Tanzania, the president of DRC, who is also the chairman of the African Union, the president of Ethiopia, the president of South Sudan, and other African presidents and dignitaries from the rest of the African countries.
Yeah. And at the moment, I mean, what is the feeling among Ugandans? One reporter saying, well, Ugandans are not only apprehensive, but they seem to have resigned to leaving everything to God.
Depends on who you talk to. Like I mentioned earlier, the incumbent, President Yoweri Museveni, still enjoys not massive but significant support, especially in the rural parts of the country. Of course, Uganda is a rapidly changing country, so in terms of our urban areas, the president does not enjoy significant support, so that's where you'll find most of the anger and this sense of resignation. But if you were to do a random study across the country, I think it would be a mixed picture. There are those who are jubilant, who feel the president has another opportunity to deliver, but also those who feel, maybe it's time to leave. And those happen to be mostly younger, more educated, urban Ugandans.
So, Kwesi, talking about that promise to deliver, what did President Yoweri Museveni promise in his sixth speech, as he comes into this sixth administration?
Well, his speech was two-pronged, and he was speaking to two audiences. One, the Ugandans in attendance, but the bulk of his speech was directed to the international community. It was a very combative speech in which he attacked Western nations and accused them of interfering in African affairs and trying to dictate what form of democracy that African countries should adopt. And if I was quoting right, he said no one should lecture him about democracy because he knows a thing or two about democracy, because for 5 years he fought for the same in the bush and worked with these poor Ugandans in the villages. For the Ugandans, he promised to continue the massive investment that the government has been making in infrastructure, in distributing power, improvement of health services, improvement of education services, and of course, he spoke to the pandemic that we're living in and mentioned that government is expanding its efforts to vaccinate as many Ugandans as possible, and that there are local efforts to develop a Ugandan vaccine that will be accessible to all Ugandans. More or less, it was the kind of speech that President Museveni has made so many times, so it remains to be seen if he will follow through with the promises.
Yeah. One of the points raised here is that he says realizing the internal market for Uganda is not enough in order to support our producers for goods and services. We saw that Pan-Africanism was a necessity for prosperity of our society. What does that indicate about what he plans to do as far as his relations to the continent?
Well, that has always been President Yoweri Museveni's pet subject. He can speak quite grandiosely when it comes to regional East African and Pan-African matters. So it's not something new. And for Uganda, it really sits at the heart of Africa and sits in a very interesting region in the Great Lakes, bordered by bigger nations like the DRC and emerging economies like Kenya. So there's a lot that the country can gain in terms of trade and having good relations with our neighbors. So if President Yoweri Museveni is to achieve his dream of delivering Uganda to at least a lower middle income status in the next 5 years of his term, he will have to push Uganda's drive towards regional integration, but also to tap into regional markets for mostly agricultural produce from Uganda.
Kwesi, appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us tonight, Kwesi Tabaro.
Thank you very much.
Public affairs commentator joining us live from Uganda. Well, some crucial